The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
Hello all Cherries fans. Hello to fans of Bradford City, Swindon Town, and across the whole of football. We have a very, very special interview for you today. Now, before we get going, hit the like, subscribe and the bell button below. It helps this channel to grow. Also, firstly, a big shout out to our two sponsors. Firstly, Touchpoint Telecoms at touchpointtelecoms.co.uk. From Swindon to Stockport, from Stourbridge to Southampton. Do get in contact with Mark and the team at touchpointtelecoms.co.uk, and also to our main sponsors, Dental on the Banks. If you do need your teeth sorted, go to dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Here's a little bit about them now.
I should be like you, Melvin.
So there we are. Thank you to our two sponsors. Now, I do have a very, very special guest with me today. And my special guest actually covered Bradford City's rise to the Premier League under firstly Chris Kamara and then Paul Jewell. He was also the head of media at the Football League. And he was also the CEO at Swindon Town Football Club. He's got plenty of stories. He's dined with Pelé. He's got sued over Neil Ruddock, almost. And also, he's taken Paul Gascoigne to bed. You'll have to watch on to find out more about those stories. It is a pleasure to welcome on to the show, Peter Rowe. Welcome to the show, Peter Rowe. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm very good, Craig. It's good to be on the show. And as you can see behind me, there's a red and black striped jersey. So excellent. Local boy from Paul, still supporting Bournemouth.
Good stuff. Good stuff. We'll get into your career, of course, reporting on the Bantams, of course, with the Football League and, of course, Swindon Town as well. But do tell us where it all began, Pete.
Crikey. I was born in Salisbury. My dad was in the Navy. And then we lived in Ringwood for 10 years, I suppose. My dad was a fireman. After he left the Navy, we moved to Poole. Lived on the fire station at Poole, outside the Speedway Stadium, opposite the Speedway Stadium. So used to go and watch the Pirates on a Wednesday night, rush home from school and wait for the gates to get open and go and see the motorbikes, which was a big thrill at that age. Then we moved to Hamworthy. I went to Poole Grammar School. Loved football as teenagers. There was a group of us, I don't know, 8, 10 of us. They used to play football down at Hamworthy Park, play all those sorts of games. I remember going to Germany on a school exchange and coming back with a Bayern Munich jersey, a red and white one, because I was a big fan of one particular person in that time was Gerd Müller, who was probably the best number 9 in Europe, sort of the Harry Kane of his day. So, you know, football was every boy, and if you like football, then you were into it, weren't you? My mum always used to say, you probably won't get any O-levels in anything other than talking about football or sport. And she was right, God bless her soul. So, you know, but I'm lucky enough to have made a living as a sports journalist and a sports administrator. covering all sorts of things over 30 odd 40 years, I suppose. Yeah, about 30, 40 years in the sport. We had a great time, great upbringing, lovely family, 2 sisters who live in Dorset. My brother lives in Gosport still. As you know, I live out here in Australia, been out here for over 20 years. But after my school days, I joined the Navy, spent 7 years in the Navy, still love football, still used to go and watch the Cherries play, Ted McDougall, Phil Boyer on the South End on the old Dean Court when it was switched around the other way.
Yeah.
They were great days, nearly got promotion, I think, that year. Villa got up and Bournemouth didn't. And, Bournemouth sort of teetered along, didn't they? Really, 3rd and 4th, up and down, 3rd and 4th division, and not really much else until the late 80s when they got promoted to the 1st division or the Championship when Harry Redknapp had his spell as manager. I remember going to that game when they played Leeds that day, and I think it was the end of the season, and Leeds fans were a little bit naughty around town, causing a few problems with the police. That was my sort of football-y type of life before I then, I decided once I left the Navy I wanted to be a sports writer. And to be a sports writer, you've got to knock on a lot of doors and hope that somebody gives you a break. And I got a lucky break. Somebody offered me a full-time job on a traineeship, and became a journalist. Worked in Oxfordshire, and then a little bit in Australia. Came back from Australia. Worked in London in Fleet Street, daily newspapers covering sport, designing papers and sub-editing and that sort of thing, Sunday Express, Daily Star, and then ended up in Yorkshire as a sports editor of a daily newspaper in Bradford, covering Bradford City as well as Leeds United and Burnley and Huddersfield. So it was a pretty busy news desk covering all those sorts of teams, as well as rugby league, because rugby league, of course, is huge in that part of the world. So moved to Yorkshire, where I met my wife, it was a busy news desk. I think I had about 8 or 10 people working for me on the news desk. It was a 7-day-week operation. We worked long hours, 10, 12 hours shifts sometimes. When some of my staff or reporters were on leave or away sick, I'd jump in and cover them. And I remember New Year's Eve driving to Bolton Wanderers to cover Bolton Wanderers against Leeds United on a freezing cold night. It was about -5, and we couldn't even make notes with our notebook. We had gloves on. It was that cold, it was freezing. And you'd go in at half time and take your gloves off and just put your hand around a cup of Bovril or something just to get the hands moving again, back out there, because it was that cold. There was no heating or anything in press boxes. And I'm not sure if there's even undersoil heating on the Bolton Wanderers pitch. There might have been. It was the old Burndon Park. Those sorts of things. Go to Leeds United. You'd meet lots of different people. In the summertime, it was Yorkshire cricket, which was absolutely massive up there. Cricket's a massive way of life for Yorkshire people. And really got entrenched in the amazing story that was Bradford City at that time.
And of course, Bradford is a 2-sport city as well. Do tell us a little bit more about, what that was like, those 2 teams competing for your coverage.
Yeah, it was because, I had a rugby league reporter, Nigel, and a football reporter, David, and I'd say to them, whatever is your best story, you come to me every day, it will be the back page. I'm not taking sides on whether it's this or that. It has to be the best story that people will want to read. And they were pretty good at it. They went out and found stories of players and signings and things that were going on at the club that we thought people would like to read about. And that was the way it worked. We had a Saturday edition as well, Saturday Pink. If viewers can remember back to the old days, and the newspapers would produce a Saturday night sports pink, or green, and sometimes in some cities different colour paper, sort of 16, 24 pages. That was a busy Saturday shift because I'm there in the office and I'm combining all this stuff, and the sports reporters would ring into our copy takers every 20 minutes to update the match as it went along, and you start compiling the story as the words are dropping in on the story, and then the pictures would come in at half time. So you got live pictures from the first half. You then figure out what photos you want to use, where you want to use them, front page, inside, all those sorts of things. And then with about 15 minutes to go, you'd get the final piece in from the reporter, and you'd hope that there would be no last minute goals. because if there was, you've got to change everything and move things around, or you've written a headline, City or Cherries win, blah blah blah. Somebody scores a hat trick, and then it gets spoilt in the injury time when something happens, and you have to have an alternative, and it's 5-5, and you're on the press at 5:15. So we set up a dummy page for the alternative. Hopefully that would get binned every Saturday night. Wouldn't need to be used, but we'd always cover our backs to make sure we've got a dummy page set ready to go in case the worst case scenario happened. And it was a case of then what you call in the media was put a top on the story, the introduction, and then really lead everything else in. You bring in all your results and league tables, get that all in, everything else. And you'd be on the press at 5:15, and it'd be on the streets at 6 o'clock. And people would be walking down through the city centre or walking out from the club, from the football ground, getting their pinks and going to the pub and reading, what our thoughts were of the game. I remember Chris Waddle making his debut for Bradford City, an England legend, and I gave him a 9 out of 10 score. I think it was the most comprehensive score I'd given because he was such a complete player. He just teased and cajoled and orchestrated, and it was just a masterpiece of football. Basically, the man was a genius as a footballer. And you see those sorts of players coming and going in and out of the club, and we had a great time. I had a great relationship with the chairman, Jeffrey Richmond. He bought the club either just before or just after I arrived, swapped it with David Simpson, who was the owner, Scarborough to Bradford, Bradford to Scarborough. And he had big ideas. He was a big guy, a very vocal guy. You couldn't miss him in the room. He was really full on. He was a lovely guy, but really full on. If he disagreed with you, the phone would go at about 10 o'clock in the morning because the first edition had already gone off the press and out, and I'd pick the phone up and I'd go, sports desk, and this big voice would say, Peter, and I'd go, here we go. He's going to disagree with me on something. Yeah, and we would sometimes, but we never had any major issues. We carried on with it, and we talked things through, and we never really fell out in any big sense at all. We never had any bans or anything like that. We might have come close a couple of times because, as journalists, they pick up stories from other sources. It's not necessarily from the club, and that can upset the club sometimes if little things leak out. But our view was if it's in the public interest, as in the fans' interest, then that's the way we go, and we run those stories. So yeah, I mean, it was great fun. Lenny Lawrence was the coach. He'd come from Charlton. I think he made his name at Charlton Athletic, but he didn't last very long. I think he lasted about a season-ish. The club wasn't doing particularly well. So he actually blamed me for getting the sack. He said, we'd put the knife in his back because of the bad, poor reporting. But we can only report. They're losing every week. You've got to report it. You're losing every week. There's only so much you can cover up. There's only so much you can sugarcoat. So he left, and the search was on for a new coach or a new manager. And from the players, Paul, came a guy to become a bit of a legend there, a guy called Chris Kamara.
He's a legend in media, isn't he? He's a legend overall, and an absolutely lovely guy. Do tell us about, when the club signed Chris Kamara and brought him in. What was your initial conversations with Chris like? Great.
I was always a little bit. You're always a little bit sceptical because you know the guy from a distance, or you sit in a press conference and he'll give a review of a game, but you don't know him really personally. And I've come across coaches that are both sides of the coin. Some are really great people, and we'll talk about those, and others not so much. Different mindsets, I suppose, and different football coaches have different views of how the media operates. Some love them, some like to use them, some don't want them anywhere near them, and hate them. So you're always a little bit cautious at first. But Chris rang me and invited me to the club for a coffee, and sat down, and he said, "Look, he said, I know you've been blamed for Lenny's departure." He said, I don't see it that way. He said, but could you give me 3 months before you stick the knife in? So, okay. Okay. We gave him 3 months, and then 6 months, and 9 months, and a year, and we had a great relationship. He took them to Wembley. and they won promotion. They beat Notts County at Wembley in the final with 37,000 fans are tracking down the motorway, down the M1 to watch them get promotion to the Championship. Lovely guy, Chris, an absolute gentleman. My favourite story really of Chris Kamara at Bradford City. I think it was the year they got promoted. Yes, and Waddle was playing, and who should turn up one Saturday afternoon unannounced, but wanting to watch the game was one Paul Gascoigne. And Gazza turned up with Jimmy Five Bellies, and the club didn't really know where to put him to cause too much of so everybody crowding round or whatever, because that was always the case when somebody turned up. Terry Venables turned up at one of the games, I think it was against Portsmouth, and sat with us in the press box, and Terrell just chatted to us, and I've got a photograph behind me somewhere of me stood with El Tel. But so they put Gazza in Cammy's office, and Cammy's office was on the side of the field towards one end, but it had a big glass window front, so you could sit and watch the game. But it also had a bar fridge, and that was the downfall, because Gazza decided to drink the entire contents of the bar fridge. Kammy told me this on the Monday. He said, "You'll never guess what happened. They put Gazza in my office, and he's drunk all my beer." And we had a real good laugh about that. That was the first time I'd come across Gazza. I came across him a bit later in the career as well. But one of those lovable clowns that everybody likes to be part of football, isn't it? Really, an amazing ability. Sadly, gone off the rails a little bit later in life, But that was Gazza's visit to Valley Parade. I can remember Kevin Keegan turned up one day, and my wife and I were sat in the director's box, and she was allocated the ticket next to Kevin, and I had to persuade my wife to swap seats so I could sit next to him and have a chat with the England coach. So, that was a little bit privileged for me, but it was. Bradford City was a great club. But when they got promoted to the Premiership, with Paul Jewell was the coach then, but it was another guy that had come through the ranks of playing and an assistant coach. Jagger was another great guy. I'd moved on. I wasn't at the daily newspaper then. I was working for the Football League, but they were great. There's stories to be told there as well. When I followed them around. I'd left the newspaper and gone to. I spent a year at the Rugby League as their media director, and then which was good fun. And then I was headhunted to go to the Football League as director of communications. And Jeffrey Richmond, the chairman, put my name forward and suggested I'd be a good candidate. Offered the job, moved to London. So every Saturday, myself, our commercial director, Brian, and our CEO, Richard Scudamore, we decide where we were going to be, which games we were going to be, and what presence we would be at, who did we have to go and say hello to, and whose hands we had to go and shake, and people we had to keep happy or people we had to keep an eye on sometimes. And so we'd make decisions, and because everybody knew I was following City at the time as they were trying to get promoted to the Premier League, they knew exactly where I was going to be, where it was going to be home or where. I still had a house in Yorkshire, so I'd drive up to Yorkshire on a Friday and come back down to London on a Monday. So we'd watch their promotion, and the last day of that season, I think it was 1999. They played at Wolves, and they had to win, and they beat Wolves 3-2 and got promoted. An amazing day. But bear in mind, I'm living in Oxford, and we'd driven to Wolverhampton, and was invited down to the dressing room after the game to say hello and see what was going on, and obviously massive celebrations, beer and champagne, and people jumping around all over the place. And the chairman said, "We're having a party at the club. Would you like to join us?" And I said to my wife, "I'd love to go." And we said, "This will never ever happen again. We've got to be part of this, So we drove from Wolverhampton to Yorkshire, another 2 or 3 hours. Got there ahead of the team bus. There were thousands outside the gates. Luckily, I got in, got parked, and the bus arrived. I don't know how much alcohol had been consumed on the bus, but my God, they were in a poor state. If you look at it from, they were falling all over the place. Stuart McCall, who was the Bradford City legend, the captain midfielder,
Yeah.
was leap, and I'm sure Sky Sports have probably still got the footage, leaping around on top of somebody's car and fell off. Did not break anything or injure anything. It was just like, probably just, I guess the alcohol just didn't feel anything, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a great night. There was a free bar. It was just amazing. And, that was massive memory for me. And we then drove home to Yorkshire and got home about 3:00 in the morning. It was, and suddenly Bradford City were Premier League. Wow.
Crazy story. But one thing that always, and I've never really understood with regards to the Bradford City story, was of course Chris Kamara made way for Paul Jewell. Paul Jewell, of course, was already a legend at Bradford. But what was it that actually made Kammy leave and Paul come in and take over the reins? I've never known why that was. Of course, it was a great move in a way because Paul did get the club to the top flight. But
I think, to be honest, I think it was probably a little bit of the chairman. The chairman was a lovely guy, and I still have a great deal of time for him. I haven't spoken to him for many years, but a great deal of time for him. But the chairman wanted to control everything. He wanted to manage everything. He wanted to be signing the players and doing everything. And I think, I think Kammy it didn't work for Kammy in that respect. And I understand why it wouldn't, because if you're a coach, you shouldn't really, as chairman, you shouldn't be hands all over everything like that. You stand back and you let them do their job. I learned that when I was CEO at Swindon Town in later years. There's ways you do and ways you don't do things, and I think that caused some issues. Although Kammy was annoyed about the way Chris Waddle signed, of course, for them in the year they were in the Championship, England International. An amazing guy, amazing player. The first game he played, we gave them 9 out of 10. I think I remarked that he was just a magician on the field. It was just amazing to watch him play. But he didn't stay very long, and there were all sorts of issues of this and that and contracts. And the chairman, first he was going, then he was staying, and then he wasn't, and then he was going somewhere else. And I think that sort of upset the relationship to some degree. Nobody ever admitted it, but when I had a drink with Kammy at a Wembley Cup final years later, he sort of looked at me and rolled his eyes when I asked the question, and you sort of get the message that, there was, it didn't. And I've listened to Paul Jewell, a podcast with Paul Jewell in the past few months, talking about his time during that era, and he talks much the same. The chairman was signing all sorts of players behind the coach's back, and that is not going to end well. That won't end well, because you've got to put people in the roles to do the jobs, and you can't really jump in and do it for them. At Swindon, I tried to sign Stan Collymore because Stan Collymore had fallen out with the chairman. Stan Collymore would arrive at the club and deliberately park in the chairman's car parking space just to annoy him. And that caused a lot of friction. He just was one of those sorts of people, and the chairman wanted him out. He just wanted to get rid of him, and I rang him one day and said, I'll take him on loan, but you've got to pay half his wages. And he said to me, I remember he said, Peter, he's on £17,500 a week. You can have him with pleasure. Take him. I don't want him, but you've got to pay the whole deal. And I said, no, we're not a club with that sort of money, so no way. But that was just one of those stories that happened then, and I think then the chairman probably overstretched his ambitions, as often is the case, because Premiership, is an expensive game to play in, expensive league to play in, and he went looking for new revenue streams, and at that time I think certain merchant banks were prepared to bankroll on the basis of future gate receipts and future turnovers. You could get sort of loans that would fund player purchases and things, and it just got out of hand. It really got silly towards the end, I think, and consequently the club went down and under, virtually nearly went out of business. I mean, they're coming back slowly now, and they're much better position, but it's a massive club. I mean, now they're in League One. They're getting 20,000 crowds. They're getting and their season ticket prices for those lower leagues, it's 250 quid. They're not expensive season tickets, so they're back in the stadium, and they're really working hard in their community to make those things happen. Whether that could continue if they get into the Championship, because that's a whole different ball game with the finances that come with it, I very much doubt. As I'm sure, Bournemouth, as they progress through the leagues, as Cherries went through, from the old third division up into the Championship, first division, they would have found that out as well. And when I listen to stories from lots of people, when you make that jump from League One to Championship, it's a massive jump, because you've got clubs dropping down from the Premier League with parachute payments, getting all sorts, millions here, millions there. You've got better quality players, you're going after. They want more money. They want more signing on fees, agents, all those sorts of things, even though I think it's 80% or so of the Football League TV revenue goes to the Championship, something in that region. And, third and fourth pick up the scraps. It is a massive jump. So, I can understand what's happening there. They're doing really well at the moment. It's nice to see. But can they go any further? Wait and see.
Well, fingers crossed for them. But one player that I did want to touch upon, and that we spoke about him just before we come on air, was an Eric Regtop. He's quite a story, this. Do tell us a bit more about him.
Well, City announced that they signed this player, Eric Regtop. I'm not sure if I can't remember, was he Dutch? I think he might have been Dutch international or Dutch. A good Dutch player. Came from Herenveen, I believe, in Holland. And he arrived in the July, I think it was. By the September, he was gone. And everybody thought, gee, what happened there? Why? And he just disappeared, and he signed for St. Gallen in Switzerland. And the story that came out eventually was that his wife, having come from the green and pleasant pastures of somewhere rural in Holland to an urbanized city like Bradford, was a bit of a culture shock too far. She couldn't handle it at all, hated the place, and he had to go back to Europe. And he lasted barely 2 months. Contract cancelled, released, and gone. And that's the first time I ever heard of that. But as you know, happy wife, happy life, isn't it? So, he obviously the lad recognised that it wasn't going to work out for him. That said, they signed some quality player. Rob Steiner was a Swedish striker, and there was a Brazilian lad, Adinho. Adinho couldn't speak very good English, so instead of calling Chris Kamara the gaffer, he called him the giffer, which was always a bit of a joke in the office when my reporter David used to come back and say, "Oh, I've got a great story to tell you," and we'd pick up on all these little snippets and things, and they were good days. Looking back, there were more good days than bad days. There was a lot of vibe going on. They played Santos in a pre-season game, and the chairman insisted to me that Pelé was coming to play or coming to watch the game. He wouldn't have been playing then, but coming to watch the game. Convinced me completely that he was going to be there, and of course he wasn't. So when people moaned, I just pointed the finger. Don't talk to the chairman. So, I was delighted to hear that he was the story that he was going to, because I'd met Pelé 10 years earlier in Sydney, and I'm very privileged. I've got a photograph on my study wall, the other side of where we're watching now, of him. It's personally signed by him, and I spent 3 hours in his company. My claim to fame is I had dinner with Pelé. What a lovely, lovely man, an absolute gentleman, a legend in the game, of course. And it was 1990. We spent many hours talking about his time playing the game. That save from Gordon Banks was one of the talking points, of course. He was convinced the ball was in. He turned away to celebrate the goal. He told me, I'm celebrating. And I looked back, and he saved. How did he save it? It was one of those sorts of moments that everybody, if you talk to Pelé, you'd ask that question. And we talked about the 1990 World Cup that had just happened as well. And he loved Gascoigne. He thought Gascoigne was a magician. He thought the England team brilliant. Of course, as we know, they got to the semi-finals in that tournament. And I think that was the best England team I've seen for a long time in my lifetime. Even better than current form today, I think. They really were a together team. And there's a couple of books out of that time, and it talks about how they gelled together and how Bobby Robson brought that whole team together and kept them together. They had a camp, I think, in Sardinia, where they were so close. I mean, and the stories of Gascoigne playing table tennis with himself, if you can understand how you can play table tennis with yourself, hitting the ball and then running around the other side, and I can try and visualize it in my head and go, yeah, that's Gazza. That's just crazy Gazza, and it's laughable, isn't it? And as we talked off air earlier, I've had the misfortune of seeing a different side of Gazza a couple of years later. I mean, when I'd left Bradford, and as I said, had a year at the rugby league, which was really, really enjoyable, and we had some fun there, including rocking up at a hotel in Leeds one Sunday morning to pay for the damage to a bedroom door that had been taken off its hinges by two prop forwards. That was an interesting £500 cheque to pay for the damage. All over a woman, I believe. These little things happen, These things happen, and they don't get into the press. I often used to chuckle to myself, being a journalist, and you think, God, I'd love to have had that story and being able to publish those sorts of stories. People would love to read, but they weren't at the time. My job then was to cover those stories up, to make sure they didn't get into the media. And moved to the Football League, and the Football League was quite an amazing experience there. And Gazza was one of the guests at the 100th season, so century of seasons of the Football League, which was at the Hilton Hotel on Park Lane in the May of 1999. Yes, 1999, and. One of my jobs was to be the chaperone for Sir Stanley Matthews. Sir Stanley was known to be a bit of a grumpy old bugger, and nobody really wanted to do it. And me being a bit naive, I suppose, of the situation or the history, I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And he was an absolute gentleman. And we built a stage in the arena, in the hotel, the ballroom, the arena. But the entrance to the stage was a tunnel, like a football tunnel. You come out onto the field. This was all done for Sky. But to get into the tunnel and come out onto stage, you had to walk through the kitchens. So we're walking through the kitchens with all these footballing legends, and the chefs throwing things around and panicking. Gordon Taylor's speech overran by 17 minutes, and the chef had souffles on the go. So you can imagine the panic in the kitchen, and it was like the rumours. Get him off stage. Gordon wanted to go on and on and on. Luckily, I think the souffles were saved. But one of my jobs was to walk Sir Stanley out on the stage to receive a medal, to commemorate the 100th season of the Football League. There were about 300 or 400 people there that night. I think it was broadcast on Sky from memory. But then after the main events had finished, people then drifted off to the bars, etc., and poor old Paul had a little bit too much to drink and tried to headbutt John Gorman, who was Glenn Hoddle's number 2 at the 1998 World Cup. Because if you remember, Gazza wasn't selected for the 1998 World Cup, so Gazza had a bit of an entretien with John, and we had to drag him off to bed. And keep it quiet. About 3 months later, the diary writer on the Daily Mail rang me and said, "Pete, did something happen with Paul Gascoigne?" And I just sort of chuckled, and he said, "It did, didn't it?" Yeah. He said, "Geez, you kept that one quiet." That's what I'm paid to do, keep those things quiet. And so it never. By then it was too late. The story was old, and it never made the news. But you meet all these different people, and there's some just amazing characters in football, that can tell all sorts of stories. And Laurie McMenemy, I sat on a panel with Laurie McMenemy, of course, the Southampton legend, and he started his career at Grimsby, his Football League career at Grimsby, and his match bonus if they won a game was a box of fish. He'd get a box of fish delivered by the fishing guys, because Grimsby's Grimsby, so a box of cod would rock up on his desk on a Monday. So, and he loved to tell those sorts of stories of What he was an absolute legend and a gentleman, and one of my favourite other guys that I had long had good friendship with was Graham Taylor. Much maligned, of course, because of the failure to reach the World Cup, but Graham was another really nice guy, and he'd gone back to Watford late 90s to coach there again, and they were promoted that year via the playoffs, and I was at the Football League, we were at the playoffs. It was the last game of that weekend. The day before, Manchester City had played Gillingham, and Gillingham were 2-0 up with about 2 minutes to go or something like that, and half the Man City fans had left or were leaving. They'd given up, and they were getting on tubes, and suddenly City scored 2 goals in injury time, and the story goes that emergency cords were being pulled on the tube by City fans, and they were getting off the train and running up the tracks of the tube back to Wembley Station, Wembley Central, to get back into the ground, and somebody had left the door open on the old Queen's entrance to the stadium, which is behind where the benches were in the old Wembley Stadium. Yeah. And we were stood there with a few minutes to go, and we hear this roar, and behind us was this sky blue and white sort of wave coming towards us. And we just linked arms to stop them getting anywhere near the players or the field, because the door had been accidentally left open, and City went on to win on penalties, I think, from memory. They certainly went on to win anyway. It was extra time with penalties. And Joe Royle was the coach, and Joe didn't enjoy the media at all. So on that day, I had to ask Joe to go up to the media room to do the interviews, and he wasn't very complimentary of the media. That's Joe. Never mind. Everybody, each to their own, I suppose. And the entrance to the media room is as you walk back down the old tunnel at Wembley behind the goal. On the left-hand side, there's a little door and a stairway, and it takes you up to what was the old medical room, basically, in the old days. That was converted into the media room, and that's the way you take them up to the media. He would have been waiting sort of half an hour later after the game had finished to do the press conferences. So Gordon Taylor going back to Watford. Watford had won. I'm on the field trying to round people up, we're organising photographs, presentations, trophies, all those sorts of things. That was your job after the game. And I'm walking back towards the tunnel with Gordon, knowing that there's going to be a press conference, and we get to the front of the tunnel, and they're singing his name. They're like 30, 40,000 fans singing Gordon Graham's name, sorry. And he looked at me and he said, he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "This will never happen again." He said, "Can we just stand here? Can we just stand here and just soak this up?" Yeah, sure. So we stood, and I'm stood next to him, and he looked at me and he put his arms around me. He said, "Thanks for that. Come on, let's go and do this media." And it was like, wow, what a lovely gentleman. What a lovely guy. And those sorts of memories, if you're a sports media, sports journalist, or you work in sport administration, those sorts of things live with you for a lifetime, don't they? Jack Taylor was another guy. I had great times with Jack, of course. Former referee, World Cup referee, refereed the World Cup final in 1974. A butcher from Wolverhampton. One of my jobs towards the end of the season was to collect the trophies and take the trophies, or the trophies would be delivered to Birmingham, to the jewellery quarter in Birmingham, where they'd be repaired, because there'd always be chips or a little bit of this off or that, and they'd have to be cleaned up and tidied and everything else. Football League trophy came in a big wooden box, sealed box, and it would just about fit in the boot of my car. It was insured for about $500,000. My car was insured for about 20 grand. It was sort of. So if I was staying overnight somewhere in a hotel, I'd have to take it out of the car and ask them to put it in a secure place in the hotel, which I did many times. And people would say, "What have you got in there?" And sometimes you'd open and show them, and somebody might want a photograph taken with it. And okay, back in the box. And the next morning, out from the hotel, put it back in the car. But Jack and I would meet on the M6, and we swap all the trophies over. Those that had been cleaned and ready, and those were going back and moving them around wherever they had to go, different places. And Jack was an absolute legend in the game, a real gentleman. Sadly passed away now. And Jack gave those penalties in the 1974 World Cup between Holland and West Germany. and what referees would give like 2 penalties? That's so soon in the game. And I had a conversation with Jack, and Jack said, I don't care what everybody else thinks. He said, I'm the referee on the field. If it's a penalty, it's a penalty, whether it's the first minute or the 90th minute. He was that honest guy. He was really honest guy, lovely man. Jack was a gentleman. So yeah, when you work in those spheres, people sort of love those sorts of tales of things that happen or don't happen. There is a club chairman who is still a club chairman, so will remain nameless, but was chairman of another club at the time. We were not allowed to call his office between 12 and 2 because he had a lady round for lunch. Well, take that whatever you want, but he had a lady round for lunch. And we used to laugh and joke about it, and then we'd have a meeting on a Monday. The Football League's offices were in Preston, the administration offices, and the marketing media was in London. We shared one floor with the Premier League's office in central London. So on a Monday, I would drive to Preston and try and be there for 9:30 for a 10 o'clock start, working lunch, executive meeting, finish about 3-4, and then drive home again, and then be back in London for 9 o'clock the next morning. I probably used to do about 1,000 miles a week, because we do 2 games a week as well, midweek game somewhere, and then a weekend game somewhere. So you'd be constantly on your toes. And I always recall this one as one of those ones that's really hard to believe, because I'm sat there mid-morning, and I was probably dozing because I'd been up since about 5 to beat the traffic through Birmingham, and we were going around the table with the different execs, and the head of referees, Jack Ashworth, was a really lovely guy as well. And Jack raised the point that there'd been an issue with a game where a referee had come back out onto the field with his 2 linesmen, as they were called then, and had forgotten to use the loo. So I decided to ask the 2 linesmen to huddle up around him so he could have a wee down his leg. And we sat there in the open mouthed around the meeting. Jack, say that again. They did what? And we're, I don't know if the referee's still with us in terms of alarm. I don't know. I don't think he refereed from that season onwards from memory. I think there was a disciplinary. But you sort of, you hear those crazy stories like that. And the League Cup final in '99 between Tottenham Hotspur and Leicester City, another great day out. I got some tickets. As working for the league, you get tickets for games, obviously, VIP area. So I had some tickets for my dad and my uncle to come, and they had an amazing day because all the alcohol was free. I had to pour them back on the train at Paddington, literally, because and hope to hell they woke up at Swindon to get off the train. Otherwise, they were going to be in South Wales. They had an amazing day. They loved it. But about 3 days before the game, we received a phone call from the Metropolitan Police to inform us that we put aside 3 seats at the back of the press area for a VIP. We didn't know who the VIP was until the day of the game when Salman Rushdie turned up with 2 policemen as his security guard, because at the time I believe there was a fatwa out on him for a book he'd written. So you sometimes have those sorts of situations which you manage and you deal with, and you make sure that there's no media around to try and capitalise on any of those sorts of things, but it was those events are great days. Graham, I remember George Graham was the manager of Tottenham, obviously legendary at Arsenal, and our head of broadcasting, Lee, and I've forgotten his second name, lovely guy, fantastic guy, and he knew George very, very well. They were good friends, and George was told that he had to go up and get a medal because in the Football League final, the coaches go up with the teams to get a medal. And he said, I don't want to go. And Lee said, you've got to go, George, you've got to go. Look, take your coat off and I'll hold your coat and you go and get the medal. So he took his coat off and Lee grabbed the coat and put his hand inside the pockets. George, there's a brown envelope in here. And we all just roared with laughter, and George roared with laughter as well, because it was the time of the talk of all those sorts of things that were going on in the game. Whether they did or not, I don't know. I've got no evidence, but that was a humour that was around in the game, and we all took it in good spirit. There was very little times when it was seen in the wrong light. There was a lot of great people that worked in them, some amazing coaches and people. You get to, Barry Hearn was the owner of Leighton Orient, who's obviously now his son Eddie is now obviously big in the boxing world, isn't he? So Barry would often be in the office chatting away, telling stories. And at the time, I think his next big thing was fishing. That was it. And we all looked, what are you going to get out of fishing? But Barry finds a way to get some coverage and some money. He's very good entrepreneur. A top guy was Barry. So you'd meet all these people. Lucky enough to have met Alex Ferguson and lots of other people that at dinners and games, and people that you go to and you sit next to, and all those sorts of things. And Football League was quite an interesting environment, let's say. But sometimes there were times when there were serious sides as well, because you had to manage certain things. And one of my jobs was to write the Football League photographic licensing contract, which was the first one that was ever brought into professional sport. And being a sports editor, I was sort of I was seen as a gamekeeper, or poaching term gamekeeper, I suppose, in some ways, for being involved in that. But it had to be done, because at the time, a lot of freelance photographers would obviously take images of footballers and along the sidelines at games, and they don't sell them then to agencies, and agencies would then sell them on to advertising agencies, and they'd just be used willy-nilly for all sorts of marketing ideas and promotions and products. And at one time, there was a huge, great advertising hoarding on the M40 heading out sort of north of Oxford, and it had a picture of an Oxford United player. Joey Beecham was the player, and the ad agency had stripped off the logo and the club badge and put something else on it to promote a product. And the club said, "This is wrong. This is our player. This is our property, intellectual property, and what can we do about it?" That was the point when we said, well, we've got to do something about it. So one of my jobs was to work with lawyers to create a license that the media had to, if they want photographers inside of grounds, they had to sign up to the contract that said they can only use those images for editorial purposes, basically. So if you taking photographs, you can use them as a match report or stories about the game, but you can't use them or on-sell them for third-party commercial reasons. At the time, I think licensing within the Football League, I think it used to bring in about £40,000 a year. It was not a lot of money, and that was for fixture lists and all those sorts of things. It wasn't very much. But by bringing this in, of course, the likes of the Sun and the big newspapers, if they wanted to produce those big promotional things, they did, for fixture books and all those sorts of things that were going on, they had to buy a license for it. So we went in 1 year from 30 to £300,000 revenue, just on that basis, and that brought money into the game that then could be used for for other things. And personally, I think it was a good thing. That was why I met Laurie McMenemy at a Society of Editors dinner in Portsmouth, and we were at a conference there where all the editors were lining up against me. Why are you stopping us using photographs? And I had to defend their role, that we're not stopping you using photographs, for match reporting. It's if you want to make some money out of it commercially, then you've got to get a license, and we want a share of it, because those images are our intellectual property. They belong to the club and the league. Nowadays, of course, a lot of those images belong to players as well, don't they? So, individual rights as well. So, you have to build that marketing strategy around all those things to bring in as much revenue as you possibly can, because the Football League was always seen as the weaker partner, I suppose, in the game, compared to the money even then that the Premier League was earning from Sky deals. So, we were the first ones to do it. Premier League followed, and nowadays it's standard practice.
How much do you reckon getting that deal in place and for football clubs and the football league, has helped clubs now in the lower tiers? Because the Premier League is a Goliath. It is where
Yeah,
everybody wants to be, but
yeah, yep.
the lower leagues are so important. The whole English pyramid is unique to this country. It's what makes
Mm,
English
mm.
football so good.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Without
Yeah.
it, I know that everybody was going on about this European Super League, which would have been an absolute disaster.
Mm, mm.
But the English game is so important because of those lower leagues. How important do you think that was, considering how big the Premier League has got?
Very important. It was a catalyst that moved into all areas now, because you go to rugby. Rugby has a similar situation. The Premier League obviously adopted it as well. It just enabled clubs to own what was theirs. Because your jersey, your club badge, your stadium, you own that. So you should have a right to manage and control that. We're not saying you can't come and report on the games, because that would be stupid and foolish. But editorially, great. You go for it. But if you then want to use those images to make commercial gain outside of covering the editorial, then you've got to come and talk to us, because they belong to us. So we'll do a deal where you can do it, but we want some of the pie as well, and that helps. That started to help some of those clubs in the lower leagues understand that there were other areas of revenue streams that they should start looking at, rather than just Saturday match day. Because as a football club professionally, you cannot survive in the lower leagues just on the match day revenue. It's impossible. You just wouldn't be able to do that. You have to look, if you own the stadium, or you've got a 99-year lease, as a lot of clubs have with local authorities and things, then you've got to make that, everything you've got to make it work 7 days a week, not 2 days a month. If you've got 2 home games and things, whatever, you just have to. It's otherwise, no, you won't survive. And as we know, most clubs outside of the Championship, they're topped up by generous owners every year. I read stories because I talk to people who are interested in buying football clubs, and they ask me, should I buy this club, or should I do this or do that? And you look at the numbers and you go, they're not breaking even. They're being topped up by 2 or 3 million a year by a very generous owner, which is great if the owner's got the money, and deep pockets to want to do it. But that can only go on for so long, because you do need to try and find those revenue streams that'll work. And as we know, the game today is expensive. Certainly at the top end of the Premier League, when we talk about, what's the top earner at the Cherries, about 80 grand a week, something like that, maybe, I would think. But then you look at Manchester United, we're talking 300,000-400,000 a week. But then their revenue streams are enormous as well. Back in the 90s, somebody once said to me, I think it was always with Trevor Watkins, had a conversation with him as former chairman of Bournemouth, and we were talking about this sort of type of stuff, and somebody said, Trevor, the program revenue at Old Trafford equates to your total gate sales on a home game. Just selling programs is what and that's the difference. That was the difference. And even though the Cherries are in the Premier League these days, they're probably at the lower end, because they're very limited. With a small ground, you're very limited on what commercial value you can get out of it. When you look at the big clubs like Tottenham's and the Liverpools and Arsenal's with huge stadium, the corporate stuff, I know everybody hates it. Prawn Sandwich Brigade, has often been called, but that's what brings in revenue. And if you want to watch the best players, there's a balancing act there, isn't there? To bring it in, whilst giving the fans still the opportunity not to have to pay big bucks as well, because you want them to be, you still want them to be part of it, because at the end of the day, as a CEO or a club chairman, you're there for a certain period of time. You may, it's a business, you may own the club, but do you, are you there as a guardian, on behalf of the fans? I think there's a balance there. You have to sort of, if you don't do that, then the fans will lose faith in you, and then you've got problems, and then you end up selling on, because it just, and I've seen so many clubs and chairmen in that situation where they don't They don't communicate properly. They don't market properly to their fan bases and look after the fans. It's very important. So all those things, they're really important from a commercial balance. But the other side is you've got to make sure whose nose are you going to put out of joint if you do such and things. You have to weigh up those options. If we do this, are fans going to like it or not, or how do we offset it or whatever? And that's those are questions that every day, I'm sure any marketing director really see at any club would be asking of his staff of how do we do this and how do we do that. Somebody once told me years ago, and this came from the North American Soccer League when I worked in the States, maximum exposure for minimum expenditure when you're in the lower leagues, and that's what you have to work at, because you haven't got millions of dollars to throw at things to make things work. You have got a small budgets, but you've got to maximize everything. We introduced advertising in toilets, above the urinals because strange, isn't it? But a guy stood there. You don't look either side, do you? You look straight ahead at the wall, because that's a natural thing to do. So put some adverts on there. So sell something in front of them, front of their eyes. And there's another whatever X thousand pounds or whatever you can bring in revenue. Simple things like that has no negative impact, on fans, but it brings in a little bit extra that helps to pay for this or pay for that, or whatever needs to be done. So, I've learned that from the hard way, I suppose, when you're at the lower end. I've never had the opportunity to be involved in the Premier League club, so it's a different ball game. It really is a massive different ball game because of the money that's involved in terms of TV revenues and all the corporate responsibilities that you have that are there. They're still there to some degree in the lower league, but certainly not to the intensity or the level that the Premier League has. So you really have to work. And I know when I left the Football League, and we're moving on to really the next bit, really, I suppose, is I left the Football League and then was appointed chief executive at Swindon Town. I knew enough about the game, and I knew enough how to market and media the game. But when it's all down to you, it's an interesting challenge, and it is a challenge, and it's 7 days a week challenge of how those things all come together, or don't sometimes.
What was that transition like to Swindon?
It wasn't. It was okay, to be honest. I mean, I knew what I was walking into. Let's put it that way. The club had been relegated. Jimmy Quinn was the coach in the season that had been relegated, and of course Jimmy Quinn's an ex-Bournemouth player manager as well. And Jimmy had left. The club was in administration, so I knew what I was walking into. So they had no money, and they were in negotiations for new ownership. So there was some positives. There was light at the end of the tunnel, so you'd say. I came in. There wasn't a chief exec, and I took the reins really. And it was difficult to begin with. Colin Todd was the coach, and Colin wanted to do it his way. Colin's very old school. Colin was old school in many senses, and my role as a CEO was to answer to the board of directors and to manage the club in whole. So we had a few, it got a bit heated towards the end. But Colin wanted to do certain things and I didn't, so there was some issues there. I'll leave it at that. When Colin decided he'd had enough and was spotted on Sky TV at Derby County with Jim Smith, Bold Eagle, who was a mate of his, we knew that he was heading out the door. And on a Tuesday night, we played. I think it was Colchester. We played, and it was a draw, boring draw. And he walked into the boardroom and said, "I'm resigning," and walked out. And said, "We just can't walk out and resign. You've got a contract. Contract works both ways." So I got on to our lawyers the next morning, and we sent him on gardening leave. We sent him a letter and said, "You're not going anywhere until there's a resolution to this. If you think you're just going to walk out and just join Derby for free, then that ain't going to happen." And Colin had an agent. Managers have agents these days, as well as players. So Colin had an agent, and they rocked up at the club on a Friday morning at about 8 or 8:30. The chairman, who lived in London, drove down in his Bentley. The chef in the kitchen was the only other guy in the club, so we organised bacon sandwiches. I do remember that, and mugs of tea, and I had a letter prepared by the lawyers to say to Colin, "You're not going anywhere until this is sorted out between the lawyers of this club and Derby County." Colin wasn't very happy about it. The chairman asked him what was the reason, and then proceeded to put his hand in his pocket and pulled out notes and coins and threw them all over the table and said, "Is this the effing reason?" There was money everywhere. There was coins, things everywhere, and I can remember looking around the corner of my eye, and the chef is looking out of the window from the kitchen, watching what's going on. And when they left, the chairman had to get on his hands and knees and pick all the money up, put it back in his pocket. And 5 or 6 days later, a deal was done, and Colin moved to Derby, and we got compensation. I can't remember how much, tens of thousands of pounds, and a pre-season home game where we took the entire gate. So we got something for it, But you have to stand your ground, because we'd done nothing wrong. We hadn't sacked him. He just decided he didn't want to continue anymore, and he was going to go, and he moved off to Derby and worked up there with Jim Smith. But you do have those issues, and as a young CEO, you learn fast, you learn quick. You go up fast. And one of the things that I was always told at a Football League conference one summer, I was sat with a guy called Jez Moxey, who was the CEO of Wolverhampton Wanderers at the time. Yeah. And I was on the table with him at dinner one night, and we were talking about, where do you live and what you do, etc., life and business. And Jez said, I would never live in Wolverhampton. I live about an hour away. He said, because if I lived in Wolverhampton, I wouldn't have a life. I'd be pestered day and night by people wanting to know what's going on, or why are you doing this and why are you doing that. And that made me think. So I lived in Oxford, and drove to Swindon every day. So where I lived in a small village in Oxford, nobody, apart from 2 or 3 people, nobody knew what I did for a living. And it was nice. So I could have a life. I could go into my local quiet village pub, have a beer. Nobody knew. Be friends with everybody. And as time went on, people got to know what I did do, because I'd leave the club on a Saturday evening at 6 or so, and drive home, and then the first thing I wanted was a beer, because on a match day I'm mic'd up. I've got a radio mic on and a pocket. I'm mic'd up to the police control room, so I know what's going on anywhere in the stadium at any one time. So I'm on my feet from midday all the way through until 6 o'clock in the evening, managing the whole stadium process. My name's on the safety certificate, so if anything goes wrong, I'm the one that's going to jail. So I'm going to make sure it's going to work, And I've got a former retired chief inspector of police who's my safety manager, a safety officer, and he runs the whole stadium facility. We had a situation with a pre-season game against West Ham, and Harry Redknapp was the manager. And first time I met Harry, lovely guy, and there was a late arrival of fans. It was a Wednesday, midweek, July. Yeah, it was July. And suddenly it's sort of 7:30, 2,000 or 3,000 still outside trying to get in, for the game. And the chairman just said, "Open the gates, just let them in." And I said, "Chairman, you can't do that." I said, "You've got no authority." "What do you mean I've got no authority?" He said, "On a match day, you have no authority. The authority has to come from the safety officer through and down to me, and then we make it happen." I said, "That's the law. We're the signatures on the document, so that's how the law works." He wasn't best pleased, but he took it, and we held the game up for about 10 minutes, I suppose, something. I remember Paolo Di Canio in the tunnel looking at me, and I don't do very good broken English Italian, but he just said, "I just don't want to play," and he stood in the tunnel, and we said, "Well, hang on, just give it a couple of minutes. We just want to get more people in." Just a pre-season friendly, for Christ's sake. And the game went ahead, but you have to. One of my jobs was to work very closely with the local police, because derby games are always a challenge.
I was going to say you're brave living in Oxford as Swindon CEO.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody. Well, There's a few people in my local pub knew, but that was all. And there was a guy there who was, another guy lived in the village, was assistant coach at Wycombe Wanderers. So Mick and I would have a beer on a Saturday night and share stories of the game. How did you get on? How did you, he'd tell me what he did, and I'd tell him what we did, that sort of thing. Or if we were playing away, long drive home from up north, you get home at 9 in the evening, you just want a beer and a takeaway. It's a long day. I'd go to away games, every away game, as an observer, not just to sit and just enjoy the football, but to watch how they did things, because you can learn stuff from other clubs. You can pick up ideas. One club had a family kindergarten. That's a great idea. How can we do that? How do we do this and how do we do that? Or some marketing and some advertising ideas. And like that. Let's take that back and see if we can change that to suit what we want to do. And we'd all share those. All the clubs at that level, we'd share that stuff at quarterly marketing meetings as well. We'd share ideas to help each other. Because I'm a great believer that we may be rivals on the field for 90 minutes, but all the other things we can share. Can we jointly get a better deal from a brewer, from a pub, a licensee, or for alcohol or for food or whatever? To get better deals, to get better margins. That's all things you have to work together on. But going back to your question about derby games, Oxford United. Well, I think we only played them once in one season there, and there were probably more police than fans at one stage. It was a Sunday afternoon. I do remember that. There was a helicopter, there were dogs, there were horses. It was. I wouldn't say it was bedlam, but it was pretty full on, in how you manage. And the police have, as you understand, they have like kettling operations where they kettle fans in and they keep them. The away fans, they keep them locked in until the others have left, and then they'll take them down to the railway station or wherever they're going. And in the police control room, we've got CCTV cameras. Every club has them, of course. But you can zoom in and you can take photographs of somebody's face if they're up to no good. And you can see them. I do remember being there. We played Bristol Rovers, and you can see they were organising a punch-up after the game. They're all on their phones. They're not watching the match. They're on the phones organising something. And the police were zooming in and taking photographs and, picking out people. And if anybody caused any trouble, you've got evidence. Because at the end of the day, that's the way it works, doesn't it? If you've got evidence, you can ban people. And, we banned, didn't ban many people, but those we banned would often say, how dare you? I did nothing wrong. And you'd say, there's the evidence. Yes, you did. And they'd shut up, whatever. Millwall was always a night I didn't enjoy because they wrecked the toilets in one game. Complete men's toilets, just all the cisterns were smashed to pieces, and I sent an invoice to the Millwall Football Club, and they paid it for the repairs. Because it wasn't just not on, is it? You just don't expect those things to happen. So derby games were full on. For us, it was the two Bristol clubs. It was Oxford, and then of course it was Reading, because Reading at that time were in the same league. And we signed a certain player called Razor Ruddock. Neil Razor Ruddock. We could talk for about 5 hours about Razor Ruddock. One of life's characters, absolutely. A lovely guy, but an absolute character. Nut job sometimes, I'd say. But we remain friends. To the point where my wife used to make curries for him, and I'd take them to work, take them to the club, and after training, he'd take them home because he had an apartment in town, and it would give him some food. But Razor made his debut for us against Reading at Majeski Stadium and scored the winning goal, the 30-yard free kick. So, Razor became an instant hero. Razor had tree trunk thighs, big. He was a big kid, big lad, and the story was that we couldn't get shorts big enough thighs for his thighs. So our suppliers used to get stuff made in Egypt. Those, I can't remember that. Zara was the name of the company I think we were with at the time, and all our jerseys and playing equipment was made in Egypt. So the story was that they had to go to Egypt to get special shorts made for Razor. And I gave the story to the Sun because it gave us great publicity. And the Sun loved the story, Razor in his big shorts. And Razor loved it as well. Razor was great fun because Razor was a sort of character that would be full of surprises and want to be involved in any publicity that was going that, not only helped the club but helped Razor up, I suppose. And one Sunday lunchtime, I was sat at home and my phone went, and one of the directors said, "Pete, have you bought the Sunday papers?" I usually buy 3 or 4 Sunday papers, and I don't buy them all, but 3 or 4 just to read through. And he said, "Have you bought the Sunday People?" And I said, "No." He said, "Go and buy the Sunday People, read page 37 and ring me back." Okay. So I went to the newsagents, literally 5 minutes around the corner, bought a Sunday People, got home. No, I went to the pub. I thought I'll read it there. Can't be that bad. And turned to page 37, and there's a big headline: Razor plays away. And there's photographers that caught Razor with 2 young ladies playing away from home, and of course his wife. He's married, So I rang the director and he said, "Have you spoken to Razor?" "No, let's ring him." I tried to ring Razor for about 4 or 5 hours. Couldn't get through at all. Eventually got through to Razor about 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, and I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm back in Swindon." He said, I've been thrown out." He said, "I was at the in-laws for Sunday lunch," and she turned the page over and saw the story. So Razor then, I think he patched it up. He certainly went through the motions of trying to patch it up and prove and blah, blah, blah. I think he even had a DNA test or something or other, AIDS test or something. He was wandering around the office saying, "I'm clean, I'm okay, I'm fine." That was typical Razor. He was a bundle of laughs. He was a pain in the arse sometimes, but he was a bundle of laughs. He was generally he wasn't a bad guy at all, a nice guy. But he was, you had to manage him, because he loved life to the full. He loved life. So, Razor was an absolute interesting guy to work with, and he sort of caused my demise in a roundabout sort of way at Swindon when the old owners decided they wanted to take the club back from the new owners, and I was working with the new owners, and there was a court case. At one point, a judge ruled that there was some form of something wrong in the contract, let's say in the sale contract, and so there had to be an EGM to determine ownership. So myself and Roy Evans, and Roy was my coach. Roy Evans, of course, Liverpool, another absolute gentleman. Roy Evans tells great stories of Liverpool Football Club and people, and Razor was at Liverpool, so there was this great friendship. After every game, Roy and I would invite people into our office, and we had our own bar fridge, and we'd have a few beers, or they'd have a few. I'm driving, so I'm probably one, and coaches back in, and Razor would come in, and the stories. "Do you remember this and what he did and that, and all sorts?" And then we just sit there and roar with laughter. Some of the silly things that went on at the races, or Razor got locked up when he was at a West Ham Christmas party when he was at West Ham, and he had the kitty. He was the one holding the kitty. So something happened. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I remember him saying, "Yeah, I had the kitty." So we did all that. But then when the ownership model went sour, which was a shame, because the plan was to actually move from the county ground and take some land out near the M4 and build a bespoke stadium, a little bit like Reading's, and put in retail, a hotel, supermarket, because these days you've got to have a commercial element to your land. Your football club won't just survive on its own, so you have to have other elements to make it work, to bring in revenue. That was the whole plan. We all liked the plan. It got knocked back by the council for some crazy idea. I don't know if that's the way councils are, I suppose. So the whole deal went a bit sour, and it got to court. I got pushed against the wall and told to go on gardening leave. A judge told me I was the only one that could sign checks and make any payments. Neither side would put money in to pay for wages, and we're left with a 250,000 black hole to pay players' wages, or the contracts become null and void. And I had to go to the PFA to get a loan. But when you take a loan from the PFA, of course, you have a transfer embargo placed on you until that loan's paid off. We couldn't do anything else about that. That was just one of those things. My job then was to make sure the club survived, and that was the only way I could do that, to make sure the club survived. So that's where we went. There was a takeover. It didn't go the way of the owners that I was working with. It got very, very nasty, to the point where I walked away, and myself and two other directors were sued in the High Court for £1 million for Razor's contract. They argued that the club couldn't afford Razor's contract, which was, I think, about the time was about £4 or £5 grand a week from memory. So it wasn't like money you're talking about today, but at that time, it was a fair bit of money. Then it was wasn't to be sneezed at. And the club of Swindon size, didn't have a lot of money. So, but the main owner, the two directors, they were loaded. They had plenty of money, and they said, "Look, no, we're guaranteeing it, so there's no problem." So it went on for, I think, about 5 months. It was backwards and forwards. It was pretty nasty. The chairman had hired 3 barristers, one for each of us, and he said, "I'm paying for them, but we're going to do it 3, so each one goes in, so it's not just all together." There's a better legal way, I'm told. It got to the judge's chamber about 3 weeks before it was due in court in London, and the judge said, "What am I looking at this for? This is an absolute waste of time," and threw it out. It says nothing wrong with the contract at all, and we were awarded all costs. So they weren't happy that they'd lost it, given that they trumpeted in the local media how awful and bad we were. And there was words like libel were used and that sort of thing, pretty distasteful sort of stuff. I had a celebratory lunch with the barrister a few weeks after the case had been thrown out, and I mentioned it to him that I felt I'd been mistreated and libelled, and he said, "Pete, yes, you have." He said, "From the evidence I've seen, yes, you have." He said, "But do you have deep pockets?" He said, "Because libel cases you have to fund yourself." He said, "You're obviously not Elton John. You don't have lots and lots of money." He said, "My advice is take it on the chin and go away and enjoy life," which is what we did, and I moved to Australia. So, and that was the last bit I was involved in, in professional football in the UK. It left a sour taste in my mouth. It doesn't now. It's long gone. It's long gone. It's forgotten. But you sort of, you don't forget it. But it's a bit of a hard one to take. Another club chairman rang me and said, "Don't worry, you're good. You'll get another gig. Somebody else will get you another gig." And I nearly was appointed chief executive at Aberdeen Football Club. I lost the vote 3-2. The guy that got the job because he wasn't at a club. So, and I was. So you'd have to pay compensation. So they felt it was an easier option to employ the guy who was coming in, clean, I suppose. Otherwise, I'd have probably ended up in Scotland, maybe at Aberdeen. I don't know. But I was. They were good times. You always remember the good times, don't you? I certainly do. And when you look at Bournemouth today, crikey, it's just mind blowing. I looked before we came on air. I just looked online to see what the odds were for Bournemouth to win the Premier League. Anything between 150 and 200 to 1. I just might have $100 on that.
Wow, you never know. We might do a Leicester City, but
you never know.
To be honest, I think I would run from here all the way to Dean Court and back, probably in my nicest bench. It'll be a bit cold, to be fair, but
Fair enough. But it's that celebratory thing, even to finish top 4. I think it's like 20 to 1 or something. To finish top 4, which is still some good odds, and I think that's achievable this year from what I've seen so far. As I said, remembering those days of bucket collections and not knowing from one season to the next whether the club you supported as a kid is going to be alive next year. They're gone, aren't they? And thanks to some lovely people that have been before, Jeff Mostyn and people like that, and obviously Eddie Howe's a legend, and there's lots of other people that were involved that helped keep the club alive in those tough times, and then brought them through. It is a modern day story that Netflix should latch onto. It really, it's one of those stories, isn't it?
It's a fairy tale because as much as some people turn around and go on about Wrexham and that story, Ryan Reynolds, Rob McAnally, have both got tons and tons and tons of money, and they've
Yep.
pumped that money in
Yep.
to get that club where
Absolutely.
they are. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, some people say about Maxim Denim and how he spent to get us into the top flight.
Yeah.
It was nowhere near what what actually Wrexham have put in. You look at Jeff Mostyn keeping the club alive. You look
Yeah.
at Eddie Mitchell,
Yeah.
managing to keep the club on a financial footing for the first time in a long, long time, and then selling it to Maxim Denim, who then has taken the club onwards.
Sure.
I know there was bad feeling between Jeff and Eddie Mitchell in the end, but both of them I think are quite responsible for helping the club to where
Sure.
we are today.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean it's just an amazing fairy tale story, and it seems to get better every year. I think back in the summer, everybody was thinking, and I talk to other people that support other clubs, and I've got friends. I live here in Australia, but I've got friends, English friends here in Liverpool, Man City, most of the big clubs. And they go, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think your Cherries are going to do this year? You've lost all your players. We're signing all your players." And like most people, I thought, I'm not really sure. But what I like, and this comes from probably me understanding the professional structures of things, is there's a good plan in place. They've got a structure in place. There's a progressive plan in place that I think they already know. If and God forbid it were to happen, but if Andoni were to leave, I think they already know who they replace him with. Because they would have that structure in place. That ongoing structure. It's a bit like a succession plan that you'd have for the royalty or something, or government. Managing those things, and it's very similar to that. And the way they've gone out and found the right players that fit the right structures that Andoni wants to play. So they've, Truefoot replaced Kirkes, and I think we all knew that Hoysted was never going to stay forever because he was just an immensely talented kid, wasn't he? But how they got him for what they got him for was quite amazing, really, under the radar. And maybe the young Serbian kid's going to be similar. Who knows? And Zabani was only going to be 2 or 3 years because he was a colossus as a centre back. And somebody in Europe or somewhere with European football is going to go, yeah, we want that lad, we want that kid because he's still young and he's still going to have a massive impact. But what they've done in bringing through the players, and then this the style of football. Somebody explained it to me as sort of organised chaos, if you can understand that sort of phrase. And it sort of comes across like that, doesn't it? It's that massive. They're the best pressing team probably in the league. High pressing team, and they've got to be one of the fittest because of the miles or the yards that the players cover, and everybody seems to know a role, how they slot in. Tactically, I'm watching and they're shifting him that way to make him play that way. They're doing this, doing that. There's things happening everywhere when you watch tactically how things come about. And the other thing I think why we're really in a positive position this year is, all the other big clubs, they've probably got another 15 games more to play this season than we have.
Yeah.
In terms of Europe, because they're in Europe already, or, whatever they're playing. And we've got none of that. So every week, Andoni's got his whole squad with him. He can then actually plan and build something for the following week's game and work on something specifically bespoke sometimes for that game. Whereas some of the other clubs, the bigger clubs, they're playing Saturday, Wednesday, or Sunday, Wednesday, Tuesday, whatever. And it's a case of play, come back from overseas, train, play, that sort of thing. And there's not a lot of space in between games to actually tweak anything, refine anything, or even change anything. Whereas Andoni's got that luxury where he does have some time during the week to be able to get the best out of his players. And each game he can look at, Palace this weekend and say, right, we know he's the threat, and this is what they're going to do. This is how we combat it, and how we shut it down, and then how we then make hay benefit, from the counter, because Bournemouth are one of the best counter-attacking teams there is, And Evan Nielsen isn't scoring many goals, but the work he does off the ball, is amazing. It really is amazing. I love how Scott's come on. Clivett's got just a great boot, and it's taken him early part of the season to get himself into the team. Christie's back in form. We've got a squad this year that last year it was a real worry, wasn't it? I think just for some people because there were so many injuries.
Yeah, there was
And it was
so
surprising.
yeah, there was so many, but we just kept going.
I know.
Even when we had
Yeah,
those injuries, Andoni
yeah,
Iraola had another option
yeah,
there. He had it
yeah,
in the back of his mind. He brought
yeah,
players in,
mhm,
and they made a difference, Peter. And I think,
yeah. They did.
in all honesty, our scouting setup at AFC Bournemouth is,
Mm, mm.
second to none. I think we've got the
I
best
agree.
scouting system in the whole country. How did
Yeah,
we pick out Kirkez, Zabania? Milisakovic looks a great player, the new
yeah,
Serbian.
yeah, yeah.
You look at Adrian Traffer. How many Bournemouth fans would have
Would have
known
heard
who
of him.
Adrian Traffer is?
Yeah, I know.
Fode Diakite, again, another player that not many people would have
There's
known
all,
of.
and I think
But
there's always a worry because French league football is always considered to be not the top
mm,
standard in terms of if you look at the standards across Europe compared to La Liga or Italy, Spain, Germany sort of thing, because there are like 4 or 5 teams really that are elite and then everybody else is below them. So you often wonder, you know, is that where you go? But that's where you do go. You find those little nuggets sometimes, and you
mm,
can get them at prices that you can afford. Whereas if you go into some other areas of the world to get players, then they come at a greater cost. I'm pleased to hear that there's plans afoot to improve the scouting system in South America, because
yeah,
you can get some real bargains in South America. Some good players. You've got to manage them differently because they're coming from the other side of the world, and culture-wise, all those sorts of things. I sort of learnt those scenarios working in rugby league, where clubs would bring in sort of South Sea Island players or Kiwis or Fijians, and they'd never bring them in individually. They bring them in pairs, so they've got somebody to live with and look after mentally. That you've got to look after those mental elements to a player as well as the physical elements, because sometimes if you're not mentally right for a game, you're never going to play, are you? You could be the fittest player in the world, but if you're not mentally right, you've got to have that as well. So you sort of, I think South America is definitely an area that needs to be looked at. Sadly, there's not a great deal here in Australia. There's an A League, which is probably League Two standard and nothing more, and there's a league below that, which is National League, if that. You get 1 or 2 nuggets come out of Australia, and that is really it. There are a lot of kids with British backgrounds, where parents think they're going to be the next George Best or Harry Kane or whoever, and I've listened to them, and I've said to them, you realise that you're going from a very small pond into a very big one with a lot of sharks. And your kid may look absolutely brilliant playing in a competition here, but going over there, it's a different league altogether, where you've got kids that have been brought through from the age of 8 and 9 through systems, to get where they are. I mean, the one exception, of course, at Bournemouth is Antoine Semenyo, because he's a late developer, really,
yeah.
because he played non-league at Bath, and places like that. So, he is an exception, and there are exceptions. You do get exceptions. But a lot of the good kids with the good skill sets, they've come through grassroots systems, at clubs, and they've been scouted, at 8 and 9 years old. We had scouts at Swindon. Ken McDougall was a scout for me at Swindon.
Yeah.
And we go looking to the youth tournaments in the summer, looking for them, and you'd be on the sideline with half a dozen or a dozen others from all sorts of clubs looking at kids at ages 14, 15. Are you going to move them here, there, or wherever? Sometimes even younger. So it's a factory, isn't it? It's an industry these days.
How important is it going to be for that Category 1 academy at Camford Magna? Because
Very
that,
important.
because
Very, yeah.
you look at the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea, Spurs. You look even at Reading at the moment. They've got an academy. Brighton got a decent academy. Southampton, of course,
Yeah,
another
they
one.
always have had. Yeah.
And the issue is actually bringing in these players at AFC Bournemouth. This has always been, something that's in the back of my mind. Bringing in players when there's all these other clubs around trying to, capture them.
Yeah.
How important is that going to be, and how difficult was that at Swindon when you was there?
It was very difficult. When you're in the lower leagues, it is very difficult. We bought 2 houses and converted them into one big sort of lodge, and where
Yeah.
we had youngsters in our academy the old YTS scheme would stay there, and our kit manager and his wife would be mum and dad basically, and they'd look after them, and they'd live there, and they'd go to college, and they'd train, they'd play, and that sort of thing. And then every year we'd look at how many professional contracts are we going to offer, and we may have 15 kids playing in that team, and you may only offer 2 contracts, or 3 contracts. And I'd sit down with parents and say, look, this is the way of the world. Whilst we're looking at our players, we're also looking at those that are dropping out of the clubs above us in the above leagues, because there may be kids out of Manchester United or Forest or a team in the Championship. The kids are dropping out of their academy. They may not be good enough for them, but they're certainly good enough for us in League 2 or League 1. So there's all those balances of trying to work out. And say to parents when the kids sign the academy contracts, it doesn't mean you're going to be a professional footballer. You've got to work really, really hard, and the chances of you becoming one are slim. When you look across the board at the vast numbers of kids across the game in England and then in Europe, because it's not just, you're not recruiting from England anymore, are you? You're recruiting from everywhere. So the chances, they are slim. You've got to be exceptional to play at the top level. But having an academy and getting those kids in early and young locally, yes, I think, and with it, and of course the lure of being a Premier League club is obviously massive to mums and dads and family. And if the right coaching structures are in place, and the parents feel happy that those kids are going to the right place and they're going to be looked after, and taught well and mentored, because that's what it's all about at that level as well. Because you've got to persuade mum. Mum's the one that wants her baby looked after, doesn't she? So you really do have to look after. And also when you're selling tickets, I always used to say, mum's got the family purse strings. So if kid wants to go to the football match, mum's got to be sold as well. And you get the whole family along, bring the whole family in. So, get all those links together. And then you've got a situation where you become, and I hate the word, but it does, it's a bit like a factory, because you can develop players and sell them on, and then that reduces your transfer overhead, because you're not spending 20 million, 30 million a year when you brought through 2 or 3 kids. They're going to give you a few years service, but then they're going to give you a return, quicker as well. So yes, it's that's a very, very important cog in the whole business structure of a football club. You've got the academy, you've got the commercial side, you've got the playing side, all those things. It all fits in together. It's not just one bit. 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, 50 years ago, McDougall, Boyer era, those things weren't there. It was just about the club, really, wasn't it? And the fans. Yeah. And that was it, which was great, because we all grew up supporting our hometown teams. But as you know, trying to get bums on seats, at Bournemouth, how many people are from Bournemouth or Paul? There's, it's a massive influx of people from other parts of the country now that live in that part of the world, because it's a nice part of the world to live. But they probably might, follow. I know people who live in Paul and Bournemouth who follow Liverpool and Chelsea and Spurs that would never follow Bournemouth, over the years. So there's a mindset exercise there. There's a challenge there to get the kids at 9 or 10 at schools. That means getting players out into schools and doing all that community work to get those kids involved that they want to be a Cherry as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Rather than jumping on a train at Folkestone Station on a Saturday afternoon and going to London. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, we can convince the best talent to come to Bournemouth rather than going to London.
It's a nice part. It's a nice part. It's a lovely part of the world. I mean, if I won the lottery, I could happily live in the New Forest somewhere. I've got, as I say, I've got 2 sisters and I've got some kids. I've got 2 children who live in Paul still as well. So they might watch this, and they love. It is a lovely part of the world. When you compare it across the whole country, yeah, it's nice. Even though people may currently, have their own issues with certain things, and we won't get into that, but they will do. Cost of living and all those sorts of things. But it's a nice. It is a nice part of the world to live in, and I think that's an attraction for some players coming from overseas, because they are coming and they're going, oh, this is nice. There's a beach, there's ocean, there's sand, there's sunshine, it's climate's better. yes, okay, Manchester United may want to pay you 3 times as much, but do you really want to live in rainy Manchester?
There we are. There we are. If you're watching this and you are thinking about coming to Bournemouth, come to Bournemouth. It's a lot nicer. But Peter, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. No doubt we will catch up at some other point, and it'll be a delight to have you on at any time.
I'm sure I can, from the memory banks, come up with lots more stories that will make everybody chuckle.
There we are. There we are. I'll hold you to that, Peter. But no,
thank
you so much, mate.
Okay, speak soon. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Cheers,
thank you.
Bye. Cheers, bye.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hit the like, subscribe, and the bell button below. It helps this channel to grow. Do check out all of our other interviews as well. We've had the likes of David Icke on this show. We've had the likes of Omid Jalili, Professor Brian Cox. We've had members of the bands Five, Happy Mondays, Ocean Colour Scene, Hard-Fi, The Blue Tones, Kasabian, Kaiser Chiefs, Dodgy. Have I missed anybody out? I probably have, but I do apologize in advance as well. So do go check those out. Like I say, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the bell button below. Thank you for joining us. We shall see you in the next one.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.